Yo, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. Real quick, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss when we drop new content. Check us out on Apple and Spotify. If you're listening on podcasting platforms, give us a 5-star review if you enjoy. Colin Cowherd had a really interesting take on how if USC football wants to become a national championship contender again, they need to duck Notre Dame. And on this episode, I'm going to be explaining why Colin's latest take on USC football perfectly encapsulates why this program has been down for so many years. We're also going to be discussing, can Billy Napier beat the odds at Florida this year? He's coaching for his job with the toughest schedule in college football. What can we expect out of Hugh Freeze year 2 at Auburn? And I also want to talk about what college football fans are overlooking about Deion Sanders and Colorado going into this season. And what's the ceiling for the Tennessee Volunteers in 2024? Before we dive into it, here's a quick word from our partner, Mint Mobile. Does it piss you off how much you pay for your monthly phone bill? Why are you getting frustrated when our partner Mint Mobile has plans as low as $15 a month that give you unlimited talk and text on the nation's largest 5G network? Stop getting frustrated with how much you spend on your monthly phone bill and go to trymintmobile.com/JTsports in description and pinned comment down below to get access to premium wireless for only $15 a month. That's only $15 a month. Switching to Mint is easy. It only takes 15 minutes to do. If you're pissed off with how much you pay for your monthly phone bill, switch to Mint Mobile today and go to trymintmobile.com/JTsports in description and pin comment down below to get premium wireless for only $15 a month. Stop getting upset with how much you spend on your monthly phone bill and switch to Mint Mobile today. So Colin Cowherd recently had a very controversial take about how he believes for USC to become a national championship contender again, they need to duck Notre Dame and take them off the schedule. Here's what he had to say.
Quite a kerfuffle last week when I suggested, I believe rightly so, that as USC moves into the Big Ten, I would move off Notre Dame. I think you're going to have these...
From a schedule standpoint?
I mean, I got Penn State, Wisconsin, Oregon, Washington, Ohio State, Michigan. I think I can live without a November game on 11 degrees in South Bend, Indiana. But it's a bigger picture. My picture is if you want to compete for a national championship, and Nick Saban's got this, manipulate your schedule as much as you possibly can.
You know what the bigger picture is from this take by Colin Cowherd? It perfectly encapsulates every reason for why USC football has been down for so many years. Because they're soft, they lack toughness, they're not physical, and this take makes them look even more softer because for USC to become a national powerhouse again, they should get rid of their biggest rival on their schedule. So instead of, improving your recruiting, going out there getting better offensive linemen, better defensive linemen, the biggest Achilles heel that you have had for the last decade or so, instead of improving that area, you just say, let's make things a lot easier for us and get rid of Notre Dame. And it's not like Notre Dame has been some kind of national powerhouse in their own right. They've been better than what USC has been for the last decade. But they're not a program that USC is incapable of being able to beat. You're in California, one of the most talent-rich states to get high school recruits. You mean to tell me that you can improve your recruiting to the point where you just got to get rid of Notre Dame and duck the fade from them altogether because you're afraid that they're going to ruin your chances of being able to get into the 12-team college football? This take makes no sense to me because he acts like USC is the only team in college football that has to play a difficult schedule. How about Georgia this year? I don't hear Kirby Smart talking about ducking, having to play Clemson, and having 3 tough road games against Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss this season. How about Auburn? One of the toughest jobs in college football is coaching at the University of Auburn, because you got to recruit in-state against the behemoth that is Alabama, and you have to play them the last week of the season, and you also have to play Georgia. But is Hugh Freeze complaining? Are you hearing people saying how Auburn needs to take them off the schedule? You see, for you to be the best, you have to beat the best. And with how oversaturated these conferences have become due to conference realignment, everybody's going to have difficult schedules. Nobody's going to get a break. Even the teams that have weaker schedules compared to others are still going to have to play at least two very good teams. The break may be you have the opportunity to play them at home instead of having to go on the road to play them. And just because Alabama under Nick Saban didn't always schedule tough out-of-conference opponents, that didn't mean they were ducking competition, because the SEC has been so stacked the last decade that you don't really have to play a tough out-of-conference schedule if you are Alabama, just because of how difficult the SEC West was for so many years. There has always been at least 3-4 quality teams in the SEC that were at least top 10, top 15 worthy. So it's not like Alabama went through a complete schedule where they only had to worry about beating two teams that mattered in Ohio State and Penn State, like Michigan had to worry about the last couple of years under Jim Harbaugh. The Big Ten is wildly overrated. There's only been 3 teams in that conference that have mattered for over the last 6 years. Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and then it's everybody else. So you mean to tell me that USC, who is considered to be a blue blood of this sport, the only way they can get back to national prominence is ducking the fade from Notre Dame? This take perfectly encapsulates what the problem is with the USC Trojans. Soft. And Lincoln Riley didn't say this. This is Colin Cowherd's opinion. This is his take. But he seems to lack, the understanding of what makes college football great, which is the rivalries. And I hate how people want to just get rid of rivalries. Rivalries in college football are everything. What makes college football the sport that it is the history, the pageantry. For Ryan Day, you don't hear him saying, man, for us to get over the hump, we need to take Michigan off the schedule. The game is regarded as the best rivalry in college football because for over the last 3 years, the game has determined Ohio State and Michigan's fate. The winner of that game was going to the Big Ten championship and probably stamping their ticket to the college football playoffs. You just can't duck your biggest rival because your schedule's tough. Everybody else has tough schedules, Colin. USC isn't the only one. If USC can't overcome LSU, Michigan, and Penn State, and Notre Dame, you know what they should do? They should go hire a different head coach who's good enough to get the job done. And with the playoffs expanding from 4 to 12 teams, you could still get in being a 9-3 team. If USC were to lose week 1 to LSU, but beat Michigan, beat Penn State, but mess up late to University of Washington and Notre Dame, they can still get into the playoffs as long as they have enough quality wins. All USC needs to do is go 10-2, 9-3, and they could still position themselves to make it into the playoffs with it expanding to 12 teams and eventually to 14 teams. With the playoffs having so many teams that can get in, you don't need to have a soft schedule. I don't really understand the point of this take in terms of making USC a national powerhouse when they got to get rid of Notre Dame, who's not really a powerhouse in their own right. They go to the playoffs every year and they get smacked. Well, under Brian Kelly, they were going to the playoffs nearly every year and getting wiped out in the first round. But I didn't hear Brian Kelly saying, man, we need some breaks. I heard Brian Kelly always saying, man, we need to recruit better players. We need more blue chip talent. We need talent that's good enough to rival the schools like Clemson and Alabama that we keep coming up short with. You see, this whole take is the reason why college football has become the mess that it is right now. Because when Alabama was dominating the sport, Instead of everybody up in their game, you know what they said? Man, Alabama's too dominant. We need to find a way to level the playing field. So you know what they did? They implemented the transfer portal. And what happened with that? Alabama and Nick Saban used that to their advantage. And I really feel like this take not only made USC soft, but it kind of made Nick Saban, kind of look undermined. Like, people act like Nick Saban was as good as a coach as he was at Bama because he had the luxury of having weak schedules, which is far from the case. Nick Saban warned college football so many times to not allow certain things to take place. And instead of listening to his warnings, you know what he did? He said, okay, y'all don't want to listen? I'm going to use this to my advantage. Instead of USC ducking the fade from Notre Dame, their ass should be recruiting better. If they don't want to play LSU week 1, then don't show up for the game. Just go ahead and forfeit. This is about competition. To be the man, you have to beat the man. And as a head coach and a competitor, you should relish the opportunity to have the chance for your team to prove themselves against the best competition week in and week out. So this just was an awful take by Colin Cowherd. And I just felt it was ironic how he feels like taking Notre Dame off the schedule would make things look better for USC because it helps them sell tickets, helps them, get back into the national championship conversation when you're still going to have to play a great team in the Big Ten championship. Regardless if you make it, you're going to run into Oregon or Ohio State. So it doesn't really matter. But don't make it seem like all these other schools like Alabama and Georgia are getting cakewalks. Their conferences have been so tough that there's not really a need to have to schedule a lot of tough out-of-conference opponents. And for the longest, Georgia has normally played Clemson week 1. Alabama, they tried to schedule some quality teams. Hell, they thought that FSU a few years ago was going to be good when they had DeAndre Francois and they went into that year a top 5 team and he got injured in that game. FSU was supposed to be great that year. It's not his fault that FSU underachieved. What about when they scheduled USC a few years ago and they got smacked when USC came out with that done behind entrance? They act like they were a bunch of dogs and they got whooped like a bunch of dogs by Alabama. Alabama scheduled USC week 1. You want them to play good competition, and every time Alabama does schedule a good team week 1, they always embarrass them. This was a bad take by Colin Cowherd. It just made USC look soft, and it's the epitome of why USC is what they are right now. They're soft, they lack physicality and toughness. You want to take Notre Dame off the schedule? Like, what? You're USC. You recruit right, and you do what you're supposed to do in the transfer portal, you should be able to beat Notre Dame. Just because you have easier access to a better talent pool than what they do. It's way harder to win a national championship at Notre Dame than it is to win at USC. All the chips are stacked against Billy Napier this year, man. He's going into this upcoming season coaching for his job with the toughest schedule in college football. And I believe that the clock is about to strike midnight on his time with the University of Florida, man. And Uncle Lou came up with a great nickname for Billy Napier. He calls him Sunbelt Billy, and it fits him perfectly because this, to me, is another example of another great G5 coach who just can't seem to handle coaching in the pressure cooker that is the Southeastern Conference. And my reasons for why I think this is going to be the final year of Billy Napier at Florida is, for one, the biggest knock on him was his play calling. And I thought that he was going to end up giving that thing up to somebody else, but instead, he reassured us that he's still going to be calling plays. So that in itself pretty much just a dagger in the heart for me because his play calling is not good. Everybody tried to blame Florida's struggles in 2022 on Anthony Richardson. And ironically, he goes to the National Football League. He starts week 1 despite everybody saying how he wasn't ready. And he looked better for the coach than what he ever did for Florida. Who's the reason for that? I put it on Billy Napier. What about the terrible clock management and in-game decision making? He's either too damn conservative or too overly aggressive at times. And there's been a lot of games that I've watched out of Florida under Billy Napier where they simply haven't looked prepared, they've lacked discipline, and they've been heavily penalized. He can't get the defensive coordinator right. Florida hasn't had a good defense in freaking years. From Todd Grantham to Austin Armstrong, it seems like they can never get it right. And the biggest knock on Billy Napier, the poor play calling, was the strength of Dan Mullen, but Dan Mullen got fired, though. He wasn't good enough for Florida. And he took them to an SEC championship and multiple New Year's Six bowl games. But what's Billy Napier done his first couple years at Florida? 6 wins, got smacked by Oregon State. You win 5 games last year. If you had Graham Mertz, you probably would have beaten FSU. But the recruiting has been really good. But outside of recruiting and being good at utilizing the transfer portal, what has that showed on the field? And with the schedule that Florida has this year, I'm having a hard time seeing them win more than 5 games. I think the ceiling for Florida this year is 7 wins. You can say from a talent standpoint, well, JT, they got a good enough team where they can win 8-9 games. Yeah, that's if you had Kalen DeBoer as your head coach. You have Billy Napier, whose play calling has been lackluster and isn't a good in-game coach. He's a worse version of what we have down in Miami, of Mario Cristobal. And it's ironic that, you know who Florida plays this year, week 1? Miami. Miami has a better team and a better quarterback, and they're going to beat Florida by at least 7 points in the Swamp. And I think that's going to be the start to the beginning of the end for Billy Napier. Now, you got Sanford. That's probably the only guaranteed win that you can give Florida on this schedule. Outside of that, you got Texas A&M at Mississippi State. You should be able to beat Mississippi State. They may be one of the worst teams in the SEC this year. You got UCF. You should be able to beat them because you have a better team than what UCF has on paper, but the coaching matchup is way one-sided. I would favor the Gus Bus over Billy Napier. On the road against Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia. You got Georgia. There's no way you're going to be able to keep it close with them. And then you got to go on the road, your last couple of games against Texas, FSU, the end of the season. And in between that, you got LSU and Ole Miss at home. How many wins do y'all see on this schedule? Because I don't see too many. You could upset Miami week 1, but I don't see you beating Texas A&M and Mike Elko. I don't see you beating Tennessee on the road in Rocky Top. And I definitely don't see you beating Georgia, Texas, or Ole Miss. And definitely not FSU on the road. Tick-tock, Billy Napier. Your time in Gainesville is coming to an end. And I was on with my dude, College Football with Sam, last week. And he asked me, JT, do you think that Billy Napier is the next Scott Frost? And when I first heard that question from him, I was a little shocked. I was like, nah, I don't know about that. But then I started to think about it. Scott Frost didn't want to give up play calling neither. And he was a pretty good recruiter too. But what was Scott Frost's issues? Poor play calling, terrible clock management. His end-game decision-making wasn't that good neither. And Nebraska oftentimes, late in games, they just fell apart. And there are a lot of overlaying issues that Scott Frost had at Nebraska that you definitely can see similarities to Billy Napier for sure. I get that we can be optimistic. I want Billy Napier to win. I've been rooting for this dude ever since he first took the Florida job because I watched so many games of his when he was winning Sun Belt titles with Louisiana having Levi Lewis and Elijah Mitchell at running back. But he may just be another one of those cases where he's not meant to be coaching at the SEC. There's an old saying that goes, pressure either bursts pipes or makes diamonds. And I think we're about to see the pipe of Billy Napier get burst this season. down in Gainesville in the swamp this year because I don't see how he makes it out. Now, if they have a bunch of one-possession losses or they find a way to get the 6 wins, then he definitely should be back for another year. But even if they have a bunch of one-possession losses, you may get a break in the schedule next year. But, I mean, we're going into year 3 and you still haven't shown any results. We're still trying to give you a little bit of a grace period. I mean, how long of a grace period do you need? The schedule is never going to get any easier. You're always going to have a tough schedule when you're coaching in the SEC. The only breaks that you're probably going to get is you may schedule more weak out-of-conference opponents. Instead of scheduling Miami week 1, you're probably going to schedule FAMU and Bethune-Cookman for your first 2 games to open the season to give you 2 easy wins. And then you just got to find where your other 4 wins. Maybe you get a break and you get to play Vanderbilt. But I just don't see Billy Napier having too much success this year. I think it's the end of the road for him. Hell, Shane Beamer, his first couple of years at South Carolina, he overachieved with relatively difficult schedules. So if Shane Beamer can overachieve at South Carolina, why can't Billy Napier do the same thing at Florida? I'm done with the excuses with this dude. It's put up or shut up. I don't care if they lose, if they don't become bowl eligible this year, but they were competitive in all their losses. It's time to see some results. If Florida can't win 6 games this year, need to cut bait with this dude and find another head coach who's more than capable of being able to get the job done. It doesn't matter how good your recruiting classes are if you're not developing these dudes and you're not putting them in the proper situation to succeed. Florida has a top 25 roster going into this year. There's not a single game on this schedule they shouldn't be able to win outside of playing Georgia. LSU doesn't have a defense. Ole Miss defense is a work in progress. FSU is in for a down season. They got DJ Uiagalelei at quarterback. I like Florida's roster. I just don't have a lot of confidence in a head coach. And how can you? The dude's still calling the plays when the play calling was the biggest knock on him last season and the year before that. What can we expect year 2 out of Hugh Freeze at Auburn? Because year 1 was really weird. They started out 3-0, and then they went on a 4-game losing streak once they entered conference play. But it wasn't all bad during that 4-game losing streak. They lost to Texas A&M and LSU pretty badly, but they came pretty close to beating Georgia. If it wasn't for Brock Bowers, they would have pulled off that win against Georgia, and you can't tell me otherwise. And they came really close to beating Ole Miss. And then they were able to turn things around and become bowl eligible. They beat Mississippi State and Vanderbilt and Arkansas on the road. And then they got curb stomped by New Mexico State. And who the hell saw that coming? 31-10 loss to New Mexico State? That was crazy. And then they lost the following week later to Alabama to a prayer by Jalen Milroe. Like, if you would have told me that year 1 was going to be the roller coaster ride that it was for Hugh Freeze, I would have not believed you. They were going to lose to New Mexico State at home and come a prayer by Jalen Milroe short of upsetting Alabama in the Iron Bowl. Year 1 was madness for Hugh Freeze at Auburn. But being realistic, I felt like he did a pretty good job last year. I wasn't expecting too much out of Auburn. I thought 6 wins, 7 wins at best was going to be the ceiling for them. He did a great job in the transfer portal. He got some really fantastic finds. You got Rivaldo Fairweather, who is one of the best tight ends in the SEC this year. He's going to be an NFL guy. He led your team in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. He's going to be coming back this year. You also got a couple of really good linebackers on your team who you got out of the portal as well. And he is bringing in a fantastic recruiting class. They bring in the 10th ranked recruiting class from last year's recruiting cycle. And they're banking on this wide receiver and Cam Coleman to have a really big year. Now, if Cam Coleman ends up living up to expectations, because this dude is going to turn 18 in August, so he is fairly young, and I do feel like the expectations for him to succeed are a little high for him to be so young. But if he lives up to them, and with you bringing in Keandre Lambert-Smith out of the transfer portal from Penn State and Robert Lewis Payton Thorne, I don't like him too much at QB, but he definitely is capable of producing better quarterback play for you this year than what he did last year, because last year he was below average in a lot of games. And if you would have had slightly better quarterback play, like if you would have replaced Payton Thorne with Graham Mertz, that could have been a difference between you being a 6-win team and possibly an 8-win or better team last year. And looking at their schedule, they should at least be able to get the 6 wins, because you have 4 easy cakewalks in Alabama A&M, New Mexico, Vanderbilt, UNLM, and then you got to play Cal, who their head coach, he's on a hot seat, and they bring in a good amount from the transfer portal, but Auburn should be able to handle business against Cal Berkeley, and then maybe you can find a way to steal a few wins on the road. I doubt you're going to be able to beat Georgia, even though you are going to be motivated for that game, because Georgia disrespectfully scheduled their homecoming to be against Auburn. That was definitely a slap in the face to Auburn players, because they were retweeting it, they were reposting it on Instagram, so they definitely feel some kind of way about it. I definitely feel like that Kentucky game is winnable. And then you got to play Missouri, who, that could be a tough one, but anytime you play Bama, those rivalry games can always get a little weird, and you came really close to beating them last year, so you definitely could beat them this year, even though it's on the road in Tuscaloosa. One thing about those rivalry games is it doesn't matter the location, it doesn't matter the talent gap. Those rivalry games, at least when it comes to the Iron Bowl, normally tend to be classics more times than not. And your toughest home games are at Oklahoma, or against Oklahoma and Texas A&M. And Auburn played their best football last season when they were at home. So if you can find a way to steal a win against Kentucky and Mizzou, and maybe beat Oklahoma or Texas A&M, and plus you can beat the easy gimmies that you're giving you on your schedule, not only could you win more than 6 games, but possibly you could win 7 or 8, which definitely will be improvement from what you did last year. Your team is pretty good. From SEC standards, you're in the middle of the pack. But overall, this is a top 30, top 25 roster. Their defense is pretty good. Outside of the defensive line, you got a really good secondary. You got a stout group of linebackers. You got Jarquez Hunter coming back at running back. He was averaging 5.7 yards per attempt, 7 touchdowns. So with Payton Thorne having more options to throw the football to this year, he should be in for a better year. He may not be the best quarterback, but Hugh Freeze, with how good he is on the offensive side of the football, he should be able to elevate them a tad bit. So I'm expecting Auburn to still probably be around where they were last year. 6, 7 wins possibly. At best, you could win 8 games if Payton Thorne plays at the level that we saw him perform at when he was at Michigan State before he transferred from there. And ultimately, I still think that Auburn is at least a year or 2 away from being true playoff contenders. But with how well Hugh Freeze has recruited, and also putting a lot of emphasis on player development and being able to retain a lot of the best guys that he's gotten out of the transfer portal and from recruiting, I definitely think that things are looking up for the future of Auburn football under Hugh Freeze as their head coach. College football fans are severely overlooking Coach Prime and the Buffs. The way people dog this team on social media, you would have thought that they won no games last year. They won 4 games in 2023, which is a big improvement from them only winning 1 game in 2022. And a lot of their losses were decided by 1 possession. They sold against Stanford. They gave up 10 unanswered in the 4th quarter against Arizona. If they would have been able to hold on in those 2 games, they would have been bowling. And going into this year, not enough people realize just how truly good Colorado is. You got a top 10 wide receiver room in the nation. We know how good Travis Hunter is, but people ignore all the other studs they have at wideout. You got Jimmy Horn Jr. coming back, Amarion Miller. When he went in against USC, he lit up that defense. And then you got some really good transfers from the portal. You got LaJohntay Western from FAU. I watched this dude play in person. I graduated from Florida Atlantic University. This dude was a stud. He had 103 catches, 8 touchdowns, over 1,000 receiving yards. He literally was FAU's entire offense. And then you got Will Shepherd, who was a second-team All-SEC selection last year at Vanderbilt. Do you know how hard it is to be productive at Vanderbilt, especially with the garbage quarterback play that he had to deal with? This wide receiving core this year with Deion Sanders distributing the football, it's going to be damn near unstoppable. Oh, but what about the offensive line? They got a bunch of backups out of the transfer portal on the offensive line. That's a big misconception. Right tackle Khalil Benson, who is a transfer from Indiana, he started in every game for the Hoosiers in 2023. And you know how many sacks he gave up? Only 1 last year. What about Justin Myers, who transferred from UTEP? He only gave up 1 sack also. And he's expected to be playing right guard. He played left guard last year. You know, you got Yakari Walker from UConn. He only gave up 1 sack and 435 pass blocking attempts. Tyler Brown, he's a transfer from Jackson State. He followed Coach Prime from Jackson State to Boulder. He didn't even play last year. He was a third-team All-FCS selection. And we already know about Jordan Seaton, who was the #1 ranked offensive tackle from the 2024 recruiting cycle. This offensive line is going to be night and day better this year compared to what it was last year. And you give Deion Sanders average offensive line, you know, he should be able to put up Heisman-worthy numbers. This dude had the best touchdown-interception ratio in college football last year, 27-3, playing behind an atrocity of an offensive line. So imagine how good he's going to be this year with more time to throw the football and actually being able to throw the ball deep for a change. You know, what about Dallin Hayden? People seem to question the talent they got at running back, but Dallin Hayden is a stud. You know, Ohio State has the best running back room in America. You know, you got Quinshawn Judkins, Travion Henderson coming back. But when Dallin Hayden got his number called for the Buckeyes, he was productive. This dude averages over 5 yards per carry for his career with the Buckeyes. And when he got significant playing time back in 2022, he averaged 5.7 yards per attempt, 5 touchdowns, and he had 553 rushing yards. Imagine what he's going to do against these Big 12 cookie-cutter defenses. Colorado should easily have one of the best offenses in college football. I'm not a big fan of Pat Shurmur, their offensive coordinator for this year, but Deion Sanders should be able to make him look like a better OC than what he actually is with the dogs that he's going to be throwing the football to and him having a way better offensive line that's been revamped heavily. Oh, what about the defense? I'm glad you asked, because you know those dogs that Deion Sanders said that they needed on the defensive line? Well, they got them now. They got 2 really good D linemen from Pitt. You got Dayon Hayes, who had 10.5 tackles for loss. He also had 4 sacks this year. You got another Pitt defender who had 6 TFLs and 5 sacks. You got B.J. Green from Arizona State, and if you're a Bucs fan, you should remember B.J. Green because he was absolutely terrorizing Colorado's offensive line last year. I know everybody did it, but he was definitely one of the players that stood out the most. He was the 83rd ranked player out of the transfer portal from this past cycle. He had 6 sacks for the Sun Devils last year. He was a second-team All Pac-12 selection. You got a pretty good group of linebackers. LaVonta Bentley was pretty solid. You're going to be moving Trevor Woods from safety to linebacker. And your secondary should be vastly improved also. Outside of Travis Hunter, there was no cornerback on this team that could stop a nosebleed. All right? You got DJ McKinney, who transfers from Oklahoma State. He appeared in all 14 games for the Cowboys last year, and every time he was on the field, he made plays. You got Preston Hodge, who came from Liberty. He was the 9th best safety in the portal, 60 tackles, 3 TFL, 13 pass breakups, and he had 2 interceptions. And you got Shiloh, and then you also got Cameron Simon Craig coming back at safety. The Big 12 is not a tough conference. And looking at Colorado from a talent standpoint, they are easily the most talented team entering Big 12 play this year. The only team that's as good as what Colorado is from a talent standpoint is possibly either Utah or UCF. And with them having one of the best quarterbacks in America, if not the best, that gives them an advantage. You know, they're going to be able to go on the road and beat Nebraska because Nebraska is going to be starting a true freshman quarterback. You know, one thing about Deion Sanders is that if you take him off last year's Colorado team, they're pretty much the worst team in college football. You guys saw how ugly that Washington State game got. So imagine how good he's going to be this year with a better offensive line and better receivers and a better defense. Deion Sanders, Travis Hunter are the two best players in college football this year. And you got them on one team. That's a significant talent advantage for Colorado compared to everybody else. Having Travis Hunter and Deion Sanders is the equivalent to you having 4 wins. And the Big 12, with this being a conference that isn't really known for recruiting that well or utilizing the transfer portal all that well, I don't see how Colorado doesn't have a shot to at least make it to the Big 12 championship game. All right, it's not like they are lacking the talent. All we really need to see is Deion Sanders improve as a head coach. The reason why they lost to Arizona, nearly lost Arizona State, and they lost to Stanford was because of Deion Sanders' poor clock management. But that should improve. He already acknowledged that he needs to make some changes. He needs to make some adjustments. He has done that and then some. You already heard what he said last year. You better get them where they're. And you already heard what he said last year. You better get us when we're down now because we ain't gonna be down like this too long. And you know, he lived up to that. Because going into this season, this is a vastly improved Colorado team for what you saw in 2023. And the fact that people think that this is going to be a disaster, they're questioning Deion Sanders' methods instead of actually looking at the talent that he assembled, people are really overlooking Colorado this year. And it's okay. Because I've already made several bets on Colorado being able to win more than 5 games this year. So all you're doing is making it more easier for me to make more money off this team. I hope y'all keep sleeping on this team. I really believe that they're going to win the Big 12 this year. Like, Deion Sanders is a winner. He doesn't know how to lose. And when he did lose last year, it definitely didn't sit well with him. You can definitely tell if you watch the Coach Prime Amazon documentary series following him and the team last year. You know, he was really pissed off to be losing a lot of the games the way that he was losing them. So expect this team to be vastly improved this year. And I expect them to make a run for the Big 12 title. People make it seem like Colorado's in the SEC. If they was in the Big 12 last year, they possibly could have won 7 games. Oh, well, they got a benefit off a weak conference. The Pac-12 was weak. That was a big misconception. And the final year of the Pac-12 existence, that was the best we saw out of that conference in well over 10 decades. There were a lot of quality teams. Oregon State, UCLA, you know, who else? Oregon was really good. Washington made it to the national championship game. There were a lot of solid teams and a lot of good teams in the Pac-12 last year. That was the best that conference has ever been in a very long time. So them going to a conference that's more inferior in talent compared to what they were going up against last year, expect Colorado to at least win 7 games. I think that's the floor for Colorado. The floor is 7 wins. The ceiling is Big 12 championship. They got a top 10 wide receiving core. You got Deion Sanders, the best quarterback in college football. He's going to be throwing dimes behind a vastly improved offensive line with Dallin Hayden at running back who averages over 5 yards per carry on his career. And you're going to have a more improved defense. Expect Colorado to be a factor in the Big 12 championship picture. I love how people keep sleeping on the Buffs this year. What's the ceiling for Tennessee football in 2024? Last year, you had a little bit of a down year compared to what you did in 2022, nearly being able to make it into the playoffs until you had a nightmarish game against South Carolina when they took out Hendon Hooker and they also took out your college football playoff hopes. But going into this season, though, this team has the capability of being able to get into the college football playoffs for the first time in program history. You got Nico Imaviava taking over at quarterback. He should be a massive upgrade from Joe Milton. He was the second overall player from the 2023 recruiting cycle. He was the second best quarterback from that class. And they was flying this dude out, taking recruiting visits on the damn private jet. So if you're not taking visits on the private jet, you better be the truth. And I believe that Nico Imaviava definitely is going to be as good as what he's been hyped up to be. He had a really impressive debut in their bowl game win against Iowa. He had 3 rushing touchdowns, and he gives me a lot of Trevor Lawrence vibes. You know, he's really long, big arm, but he's way faster than what Trevor Lawrence is. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be the next Trevor Lawrence, but he has a lot of similarities to him. And he's going to have a really good group of wide receivers to throw the football to last year. And the big reason why Tennessee's offense struggled wasn't all because of Joe Milton being unable to read defenses, not being that accurate. They also dealt with a lot of injuries at this position as well. But you have Squirrel White, Bro McCoy, Dante Thornton coming back. You got a really good transfer in Chris Boswell, who comes from Tulane. He was a top 100 player from this past year's portal cycle. He's long, he's fast, he's super athletic. Last year for Tulane, he caught 44 passes for 711 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. Also look out for true freshman wideout Mike Matthews. He could end up having an immediate impact for the Vols this year as rotational guy. They also have a lot of 4-star guys as depth and rotational pieces, so they're very deep at wideout this year. So if they have a couple of injuries, they should be able to overcome them because they should have that next man up mentality with how deep they are at that position. Now, running back, you lose Jalen Wright and Jabari Small to the NFL, but Dallin Sampson, he takes over as RB1. He was really productive last year, 5.7 yards per attempt, 7 touchdowns, 604 rushing yards. Also look out for Cameron Seldon. He should get a ton of work. He's probably going to be their best pass-catching back on the team this year. And their offensive line returns 3 out of 5 starters from last year. And they also added Lance Hurd, who is a transfer from LSU. He was a 5-star from the 2023 recruiting class, and he was LSU's best player from that recruiting class also. So that definitely was a big loss that the Tigers took, losing him, and it was a big pickup for Tennessee this year. He's expected to be a plug-and-play guy at left tackle this year. And one thing that people don't give Tennessee enough credit for is how physical this team was. Not just on the offensive line with their ability to be really good at opening up holes in the run lane, but they had one of the better defensive lines in college football this year. And going into the 2024 season, this is probably the best defensive line in college football. If not, they're definitely in the conversation for being one of the best. And they're led by James Pierce Jr., who's expected to be a top 5, top 3 pick in the 2025 NFL draft. Not only do they have a lot of depth, but they have a lot of quality starters on this D-line who probably are going to be day 2 guys in next year's draft as well. Their linebacker unit is really good. The biggest concern with Tennessee is the fact that they lose 5 starters from the secondary, which is a big question mark. But the thing with Tennessee is that I never felt like they've gotten good secondary play. And it's really hard to have a great defense where your offense is as fast as what Tennessee's is, because your defense is always going to be at a disadvantage because they're going to be on the field for way more mini snaps than what you would like them to be. But looking at their schedule, it's pretty favorable considering the tough schedules that a lot of other teams have to deal with this year in the SEC. You got Chattanooga, NC State, Kent State. Those should be easy wins for you. Maybe not NC State. That might be a little bit of a tight game, but I expect you to win that one. So you're 3-0 going into your first big road test of the year against Oklahoma. That's a game that could go either way. I like Oklahoma a lot too. They definitely are a team that, like you, is capable of being able to make it into the 12-team college football playoffs. And then after your bye week, you catch a break because your next 2 games are definitely wins. You got Arkansas on the road. You got Florida. You should be able to beat both of those 2 teams. So at this point, let's say you're able to beat Oklahoma on the road. So you're 6-0 going into your home game against Alabama. And going up against Kalen DeBoer is not going to be an easy game for you, but you do have the luxury of playing them in Rocky Top. And we remember what happened the last time Tennessee hosted Alabama at home. They came away with the win back in 2022. Then you get another bye week before you get into the easier part of your schedule. UK, you should be able to take care of business against the Wildcats this year. I think they're more of a above average team this year, but I don't really think they're quite on your level unless Brock Vandagriff just plays out of this world. You got Mississippi State. They're probably going to be one of the worst teams in the SEC this year. I doubt you beat Georgia this year only because you're playing them on the road. And then you got UTEP and Vandy to close out the season. The ceiling, in my opinion, for Tennessee this year, this may sound like I'm being a little bit crazy and I might be overhyping this team just a tad bit, but 11 wins is the ceiling for the Vols, in my opinion, for this season. You're going to have a really good offensive line returning 3 out of 5 starters. You're also going to be really deep at wide receiver. You got Nico Imaviava taking over for you at quarterback. And if he's as good as what he's been hyped up to be, he should be what is the difference in you being able to get into the 12-team college football playoffs and maybe winning a playoff game. And your defense, with how good your defensive line is going to be, that should help your secondary out a lot because they're not going to have to cover these wide receivers for that long, especially when you have a guy like James Pierce who's as good as a pass rusher as what he is. I'm really excited about the potential that Tennessee football has in 2024. If everything goes right, I could definitely see them being an 11-1 team. Possibly they end up making that trip to Atlanta, because even if you lose to Georgia, there's a good chance that you might not have to worry about them into the college football playoffs, because they could end up losing 2 games with just how tough their schedule is. They have to go on the road, and I believe they have to play Alabama, Texas on the road, Ole Miss on the road. So Georgia has a very difficult schedule. I could definitely see Georgia losing 2 games this year, and you definitely have the capability of only being able to lose 1, which may be to Georgia. So I definitely see the ceiling for Tennessee being 11 wins this year. I definitely think that a lot of people are kind of sleeping on them. They never get talked about in the national media at all. So I'm really high on Tennessee this year. If I had to give you an overall record prediction, I probably have them at 10-2 this year. And 10-2 is still good enough for you to qualify for a spot in the college football playoffs, because that means that you're at least going to be able to beat Alabama or Oklahoma, which should be 2 quality wins for you. And Alabama, they're a top 10 team in their own right. I love Kalen DeBoer. And Oklahoma, they're a team that's under the radar too. So I think that 10-2 should be good enough for you to get into the college football playoffs. But if everything goes right, and let's say you only have 1 loss, rather it be against Oklahoma or Georgia on the road, you definitely should be a lock to get into the college football playoffs, in my opinion. So this is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. If you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast as well, wherever you get your podcasts from, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. The JT Sports Podcast is available. Give us a 5-star review. Make sure that you like and subscribe. Turn on post notifications so you don't miss when we drop new episodes. And I will see you guys shortly with another episode of the JT Sports Podcast.